All right, so today's content is working using VBA to interact with Google Sheets. It says Google Docs there. It probably should say Google Sheets. Because we're going to today from Excel push data into Google Sheets and then pull data back down. It's kind of a stepping stone towards where we're headed on Monday, which is remote controlling Chrome. So we started this semester, pretty early in this semester, automating the web query, which allows us to pull data in from a publicly available website. What we're doing on next Monday is controlling Chrome so that we can actually make it log into a website, something that you have to log into, and be able to get data from a password protected website, and also to be able to extract data out of the HTML, not just what's visible on the page. And so today we're getting familiar, we're getting another useful, really useful technique, but we're getting it, it's more like we're going to be using Google Sheets more like a database. In fact, we're going to take our database writing example and we're going to modify it. So instead of writing information into a database, we're going to write it to Google Sheets, and then we'll pull it back out of Google Sheets into Excel. So that's where we're headed today. So let's go ahead and download all three of these files. This dbwrite fall23 file, this is the same file that we did 2 classes ago. So if you have that one, you don't need to download it if you followed that one along. We'll be building on that example. And then these other ones, mod encrypt and mod web query.bas, those are actually VBA modules that have been exported to text files so that they could be imported. So those are just some VBA code that we're going to be importing to work on this example. So I'm going to go ahead and get that dbwrite fall23 file open. And you remember our example here is that every time we change a cell here on this sheet, we're writing the information, like we're logging that to the database. And I don't remember if we left, I think we left off doing this in Access. Let's just take a look. Alt F11. And so just to kind of review on this, if I come to my workbook, we should see that in my workbook module, I've got an event set up on sheet change. So when any sheet changes in this workbook, we're going to call record edit, and we're sending it the first cell of the range that's being changed and the worksheet. So record edit should be over here in module 1. Yeah, so here's record edit. So we're taking in a reference to the sheet and a reference to the range that we're trying to log. We're connecting on to our Access database, and then we're building a query using the information that was passed in to kind of fill this query out, filling in the username, the sheet's name, and so forth. So that's currently like logging those sheet changes to a database. So I'm going to just copy this whole thing, I guess. I'm going to copy record edit. And I'll paste it right up here at the top, maybe below my sub runner, where we'll be practicing. And let me change the other one to record edit DB. So I've got one called record edit DB and one just called record edit. And we're going to modify this one called record edit. Where is it? This one called record edit to, instead of writing those logs, like logging those changes to a database, we're going to log it to Google Sheets. Now, there's a couple of ways for us to get data into Google Sheets. One would be to use the Google Sheets API. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. And it takes a little bit of setup to do because you've got to get yourself an API key and you've got to enable the API in Google for you to be able to work with it. And that gives you much more flexibility in terms of what you could do with a Google Sheet. So in that case, you could refer to specific cells and plug data into cells, change formulas, change the formatting of the sheet, and everything. That's one way to do it. We're not going to do that way. It's just more than we can bite off at this point in the semester. The second way is, in fact, I'm guessing that most of you have done the second way, not through VBA, but you've gotten data into a Google Sheet by using a Google form. Just show me on a scale of 0 to 5 how comfortable you are with like the idea of making a Google form and using it to allow people to put data into a Google Sheet. So I'm seeing mostly 5s and a couple of 2s, a 3. So looks like most of us have some experience with it. So the idea behind the Google form is just, it's a form, it's a URL you can give to someone, they'll fill in the data, and then when they hit submit, it sends that to a script that's running somewhere in the cloud for Google, and it will record that data into that Google form, and you can choose to put that onto a Google Sheet. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to make a Google Sheet, but instead of having the user fill it in, we're going to have VBA send the same information that gets sent from the user filling in that sheet. And Google Sheets, I mean, if you think about like how broadly Google Sheets is used, Google is totally set up to ingest a crazy amount of data really fast from Google Sheets. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're just going to leverage that, like Google's made that free to use. And so we're going to just kind of piggyback on their huge infrastructure to be able to ingest that data and do it really quickly. So in order to do that, our first step is going to be to make a Google form. So back on our sheet, we've got a link to a Google form. That's just to kind of look at one that's similar to what we'll be using here. But let's go ahead and build a Google form from scratch. So I'm just going to open up my Google Drive. So drive.google.com. And I probably have a folder for this class somewhere. Let me find it. Family, me, work, Information Systems Department, IS 520. Oh, VBA form 1, 2, and 3. I'll make another one. So I'll make a new folder. And you can put this anywhere. I'm just going to try to keep myself a little bit organized. I'll call this VBA form 4. And then inside that folder, yeah, it looks like we've got that information in there. Inside that folder, I'm going to make a new form. So new Google form. And we're ready to go. All right, so I want to let's get ourselves to this point where we've got a brand new Google form that we're ready to build. Does anyone need help getting to this point? Or anyone say, I need just another half a minute or so to be able to get here? So a couple of you are almost there. While you're getting there, let me tell you a little bit of the background on Google Forms. So it was probably about 3, maybe 4 years ago that Google Forms made a substantial change in the way that they ingested data from these forms. It used to be that when you're filling out a Google form, even though it was really long, you're filling it out, and as you're filling it out, Google's just saving that information on the web page. And so if something happened for you to like close that web page before you hit submit, everything you filled out was gone. About 3 years ago, they said, you know what, why don't we save this along the way? And so they made it so as you're making changes, it saves it. And then when you submit, it just then says, okay, now we're submitting that information. Even though it's like if you closed it and came back, it would say, hey, you had this thing partially filled out. And unfortunately, like that change makes what we're doing a little bit more complicated. So we're going to turn off that autosave feature just so that building this will be a little easier for us to look at. So let's just go ahead and come here to settings on the Google form. And under presentation, the very last option is disable autosave for all respondents. It seems a little strange to turn, because I'm turning this button on to turn off autosave. It seems like that should be the other way. Like it should be default to on and have it be autosave, but we are turning on the disabling of autosave. Anyway, that last one, just turn that button on. And so that's going to say, kind of revert to the way that it used to be, and that is, don't submit anything until the user says submit. Because that's what we're going to do. We're going to get this information in Excel. We'll get it ready in Excel, and then we're just going to dispatch a request to say submit this data. So we'll bundle that data up, and we're going to send it to the Google Sheet. Okay, so let me come back to questions, and let's build the questions. The questions that I want to build, they're going to be this same set of things that I was bringing in for my like I'm putting in the same information. We're doing the same example, just using a different back end. So I'm going to need to have a user, a book, and a sheet. So let me just put those as questions here. So the first question here will be the user. And it came as a short answer. That looks great. I'll just copy that. The next one I want is a workbook. I'll copy that one, short answer. Now the worksheet or the sheet. I'll copy that one. What else did I have? Sheet, address, formula, and value. Address, copy, formula, copy, and value. So how many do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've got 6 short answer questions. The name that I gave these is going to be the name of the column where the data comes in the sheet, but we don't need those names to actually put the data in, but that's what they're going to be listed as. Okay. Anyone show me on a scale of 0 to 5 how many more minutes you need to get caught up with me? 0 is I'm with you. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. All right, so let's, I'm just gonna go ahead and preview this form so I can get one entry put in here. So we'll preview this. And then this is the part that you would normally give this URL to a user to put their data in. We're only gonna use this once or maybe twice. So I'll just go ahead and put my information in here. GLN2, what's my workbook? It's called WB XLSX. Probably XLSM. What's my sheet? Sheet 1. Address, I'm modifying B22. The formula I'm putting in here is equals 2 plus 2. And the value, that would be 4. Now, so I am filling out by hand this form with the same information that I'm going to be pushing in automatically from VBA. So it's the same thing. Every time the user changes a cell, we're going to log the information about what they just changed. But this is just so I can kind of see the data structure and get myself set up. So I'll click on Submit. And it says my response has been recorded. That's outstanding. I'm going to leave this tab open and come back over to where I'm setting that form up. I now have one response. And I'm going to go ahead and view this in the Google Sheet. So I'll select response here, link to sheet, and create a new spreadsheet, untitled form responses. Maybe I should title this form first. I guess I'll call it web log. Web log. And create. So yeah, so here's the sheet now, and you can see that I brought in those values right here. Oh, and nicely, it's also giving me the timestamp that came in. Okay. Any questions to this point? Based on how most of you are like 5 on using Google Forms, this is stuff you've seen before. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little bit devious here. We're going to come back here to where we submitted this form, and let's submit another response. And so now, like for this next part, we got to understand a little bit about the hypertext transfer protocol. So HTTP, you're familiar with the term HTTP. So it's a protocol. The protocol just says it's a set of rules so that different computers can talk to each other on some kind of network. And so hypertext transfer protocol allows my computer that's running this browser to talk to a web server, to Google somewhere out there in the cloud. And there are several ways that I can send an HTTP request to a server. So my browser is going to send a request. The 2 main ways that we do it, the 2 main methods that we use to send a request are called post and get. So just show me on a scale of 0 to 5 how comfortable you are with those 2 methods of sending data. Like 0 is, I never even knew that there was different ways of doing it. It's post and get, you say, and 5 is, yeah, I've done a lot in this way. So wow, that's like a bimodal distribution. I'm seeing all 5s and 0s except for 1, 2. So you've heard of them before, but don't know much about it. So The default way, like if you just put type a URL into a browser, you are sending a GET request. In a GET request, the only thing that we send is the header. The only thing we send is like the URL. We say to the server, here's the URL. Give me the file that's associated with this URL. There's another approach called POST. And POST says, hey, I'm going to this resource, it sends the same URL, but it also has a body. It says, here's a bunch of data that we're sending up to it. And that's what happens with this form. When we submit this form, it's sending it with the method called POST. So it's got a URL that it's going to redirect to, and that we could have seen that URL like in the browser when we were at the confirmation page. But what we don't see with that URL is the data that we sent up, the body, like all the information that was a part of this form. So the good news is that we can change this form to send the information by GET instead of by POST. By POST is a little more complicated. Could we interact with this by POST through VBA? Yes, we could. It's not going to be nearly as simple. But if we could say, you know what? Instead of sending the information with the form as part of the body, send the information from the form as part of the URL using the GET method, then we'll be able to see exactly, well, just format a URL properly and send it. We'll be able to get the information to go. And so that's what we're going to do. So we are going to actually modify this form. Like Google has sent a copy of this form to this browser. It is sitting in this browser. We are going to modify the copy of this form that is sitting in this browser right now to make it submit with GET instead of POST. And you'll see why that's important here in just a minute. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to right click and choose inspect. And this is going to, it's going to bring up like the elements of this page. This is the HTML that underlies this page. You can work with it here, and you will need to see what we're dealing with here, but I'm going to just come to these little three dots right here and split this into a separate window. So instead of being over there where it's tiny, I'm going to make this open in a separate window. It'll just allow me to show you better what's going on. So I'm just going to undock that. And it's now in a separate window over here. And I'm going to bring it up so we can see it a little bit better. So here, this is the HTML that underlies that. And again, I can get to this by right-clicking somewhere on this page and choosing Inspect. So here's the HTML tag that defines the document. An HTML document has, show me your comfort level on like working with raw HTML, just like looking at an HTML. 5 is like, I've done it quite a bit. 1 is, one time I saw it once and wondered what it was. Okay, so again, a lot of folks are up there at 5 and then several other here at 2. So we don't have to like totally understand everything that's here, but this, what we're looking at here is the way that page is currently rendered in the browser. And so what HTML is going to have like some main sections. It's an HTML tag that says this is a hypertext markup document. HTML here, and then /HTML says that's the tag. Everything inside of that is this document. That document has 2 parts. It has a head and it has a body. I'm going to collapse both of those. So the head is information about the page. The body is the information that the page actually shows. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the form object, the HTML form object in this Google form that defines all of these different fields that we're typing information into. And so I'm going to go ahead and open this, and I'm looking for a tag that says form. And it's probably going to be easier for me to hit Control F and look for open tag form, F-O-R-M. And it says it only finds it once. And so it's found this form tag, which is, in the body, it's on a division of the page. There's a division here, and it's got another division kind of with these weird identifiers on them. And then here's form. So it's nested a couple of levels into the document, the body of that document, but the form is what I'm after. And so I'm going to go ahead and open this one up. You can see that it's form here to /form here. It's got these 3 dots in the middle, which means there's more to see here. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up so we can see then all of this form. And it's got a div in here as well. We'll open that one up. Boy, how many do we have to open up to get to it? Yeah, I think we're getting to them now. Hopefully. Anyway, we're going to come back to here in just a moment. But what I'm after here is on the form tag itself, there should be something called method. There should be an attribute called method, and here it is right here. So method is post. So it's using the post method to send the information, which means the URL that gets me to the script on the server that's going to ingest this data, and then the body is where the data goes. But if I change that from method post to method get, we're saying, hey, form, when you submit, send your information through a different way. Send it where you put everything in the URL. Forget the body, put everything in the URL. And by making that change on this live page, I have now just changed the way this thing is going to submit its data. It's going to use a different method to send the data. And so let me come here and enter another one. So I'll put my same information again. gallen2, workbook wb2.xlsm, worksheet, sheet 1, address B44, formula equals 2 times 2 this time for a value of 4. Now, the fact that I've changed that method to get here in the live form, I've literally modified the way that this form is currently working. In fact, just to kind of prove that, can I find the heading on this? So somewhere on here it says untitled form. Let me just find untitled. So right here, that's one place. Trying to see if I can find where it's actually showing. Okay, so here's where I think it's actually showing untitled form. I'm just going to change that to say VBA form. You don't have to do this. This is just to show that I'm literally editing that page. I'm editing the content of that page. And so when I changed the method from get to post, it says it's found it. Form. Maybe I just have to scroll over to it this time. I don't know why it's not wrapping. But anyway, because I've changed that from post to get, like in the same way that I've modified the form by changing the name, I've modified the way that form is going to submit. So when I submit it, I'll submit now. It should still ingest that data fine. Your form has been recorded. But now look at this URL. This URL has all of my responses right here in it. I'm going to copy this and put it into Notepad so you can see it. So this is that URL. And there is my username. Here is my worksheet name. Here is my sheet name. So I can take this URL now, and this has all the information in it. Let me just change this. I'm going to change this from gallen2 to a different net ID, STU student net ID. And I'm going to take this URL and I'm going to open up an incognito browser, a brand new browser. I'm going to paste that URL in, and it tells me my response has been recorded. Let me go take a look at my Google form. And I've got those 3. Like there's the one that I just put in. So what I've done now is I have built a URL that will submit to the web form. Okay, show me your comfort level with what we've just done. 5, 4, 4s and 5s. Okay. So now all we would have to do inside of VBA is to be able to format a URL with the information we want like this, and then send that URL off to be processed. We ready to do it? Let's do it. Now, an important part here is that, let me just kind of look at one of these. Here's my first one. So let's just kind of talk about the parts of this URL first. Here's the protocol. So the protocol says we're communicating with encrypted hypertext transfer protocol. Then between that and the next slash is the host name that gets me to a machine. Between that slash then and the question mark is a resource on that machine. So this is getting me to the script that's going to process the data that I'm sending in. Everything after the question mark are the parameters that I'm sending. And so I'm going to see name value pairs. So here's and they're separated by ampersand. So every ampersand I see here is saying, that's a different name value pair. So here, that's the first field name that's it's expecting to be able to bring that data into this field. It's a really weird name, entry dot, and that number is different for me than it is for you, because it's set up specifically for this form. And so what I've got to do is say, okay, that's the entry, and I'm going to get my information then plugged into here where the actual values are. So let's copy this and come back to our code. So I've got this record edit, and let's get rid of this database stuff. So I don't need the connection. I don't need the connection string. I don't need the SQL. I don't need any of this. I'm going to leave that where, leave SQL where it is for now. And let's demo a variable called URL instead of SQL. And then let me say URL equals, and I'm going to paste that URL in here. That's one long line. I think before I paste it in, and just because it'll be easier for you to see, I'm going to go ahead and put the same kind of parameters in this that we did with the SQL. Remember with the SQL, we made a parameterized string that had most of the SQL there with some values that we were going to insert. I'm going to do the same thing for my URL, but I'm doing it over here where you can see it a little bit better. So I've got something called a user. So I'm going to copy this tag that I can use to replace that string. I'm going to copy that and put it in here for my user. You can work this directly in your VBA editor. I'm just doing it here so it wraps and I can see a little bit better. And I think that wrapped because it sees that bracket and it's like, oh yeah, that's a good place to break. That's all right. So my next one is my book. And so that was wb2.xlsm. Next one is my sheet. And that is sheet 1. My next one is my address. That was like B44. Then I've got a FRMLA. And it's a little tougher to find because it's got an equal sign built into it. Now, the trick is that equal sign is a reserved character in this URL. Let me see if I can find it. So I just got the address. And then here's my next one. Oh, shoot. It's got a partial response in it. Do you have partial response showing up in yours? We definitely wanted to avoid showing a partial response. That's that thing that I thought we'd turned off. So that's why I'm not seeing that formula in here. It's like this is, what's that? Oh, it's right here. I went past it. Very good. So let's come here. Now, My formula starts with equals, but equals means it's like a name value pair. The equal means something in the URL. And so what it's done here is it has encoded that equal sign. So the percent says the next two characters are giving us an encoded version of that value. If I were to come here and look at my ASCII table, and let's just look for the equal sign here. Here's the equal sign right here. It's character number 61, but in hex, 61 is written as 3D. And that's what it encoded that as, 3D. So that says, by the way, this is an equal sign, but I can't use an equal sign because the equal sign means something here. And so I'm going to put my formula there. Equals percent 3D. That's the formula that I've got to get in there. And then there's my value, my last tag. Value of 4. Now, this FVV1, I'm not sure what that is, this partial response. So what I'm going to do, now that I've those in, I'm wishing I hadn't put those in just yet. I'm going to do this. I don't think you need to do this along with me. I'm just going to verify that I'm going to copy this URL again. I'm going to verify that if we take some things out, it still brings in the whole data. So I don't think I care about this partial response. Oh, it says partial response is null. Page history. I'm just curious, if I take all of those off, will it still submit? Looks like it's submitted. And I've got another one with net ID. I'm going to try to take off that FVV on the end as well. And it brought another one in. Okay. So now in editing that URL, I'm going to take everything where this FVV starts. So after I put val, I'm just going to get rid of the rest of it. It's like the form still submits just fine without that. So I've made now a minimal URL that I can use to submit that information into the form that has these parameters in it. Now I'm going to bring this back and put it into my VBA. So my URL, just go ahead and plug that whole thing in. So I don't need SQL anymore. And I don't need to change the username. So now, instead of doing all of this parameterizing with SQL, I'm going to do that with URL. So I'm just going to come change all of these that say SQL to say URL. And I've got this procedure that prepares my SQL that does some formatting I need for the SQL. I'm going to change that to prep URL. We'll have to go create the prep URL. So we'll do prep URL on all of these. I guess I could have done a search and replace for SQL and change it to URL, and I've been in good shape. I'll print the URL. We're not going to execute or close. And it looks like I copied something a little bit wrong here. So I think I don't need that. That was like that's left over from my, that was in the middle of I pasted it in the middle of my Acme subrunner. That was just my mistake in pasting. The Acme subrunner should be up here like this, saying record and edit and send the active sheet and the active cell in. That looks better. We haven't done anything to submit it yet, but we should be building that URL at this point. Oh, once we do our prep URL. So let's go copy prep SQL, duplicate it, and call it prep URL. So here's prep SQL. I'm going to bring it up close to where the one I'm working on is and call it prep URL. I also need to set the value. Remember, the way that we set the return value for a function is setting the name of the function equal to something. So down here lower where we say prep URL, we have to change that to prep, or we were saying prep SQL, we have to change it to prep URL. Because one of the things we're going to have to prepare for each one of those is we're going to have to encode it. Because if the user types in, and we're going to get those equal signs, we can't just drop that equal sign in without changing that equal sign to a %, what was it, 3D, 5D or something? 3D, it's like a three-dimensional equal sign. And so we'll need a procedure for doing that. There's no procedure built into VBA for doing that. But that's why we have those other two exported modules to import. So let's go ahead and import those now. So I'm going to come back to my, just remember that we're going to now import mod encrypt bass and mod web query bass. So we'll download both of those, and then we're going to import them. And here's how we import them. So I'm here on module, my module 1. I guess that doesn't really matter. And I'm going to choose File, Import File. And then I'm going to browse to find each one of those. So in downloads, here's mod web query bass. File, import, file, mod encrypt bass. And you'll see that I have those two modules now right here. So I brought that code in, and so we should be able to rely on functions that are in here to be able. Let me show you the one that I'm after first. So I'm going to open up mod web query. I think I'm going to open up mod web query. Yeah. So web query is just code that will build a web query. You remember being in a semester, we record ourselves making a web query and then modifying it. This one just builds web queries from scratch. But I'm most interested in something at the bottom of this called URL encode. So here is a function called URL encode. I give it a string that I want to encode, and it sends me back the encoded string. So I should be able to call URL encode, pass it an equal sign, and it should pass back %3D. So if I do like a formula, 1 + 2, it's going to encode that. It says, by the way, the plus is also reserved. A plus means something in a URL. And so it's converting that into something that will be that value as it should be represented in a URL. So this URL encode function will take that part of my URL that I'm building and encode it properly so it can go into the URL. And that's what I need prep SQL to do, prep URL to do. So let's go modify prep URL, which is in module 1, to do that for me. So this whole stuff about null, we don't need. We do need a temp. If it's a number, we don't really care. What I really want to say is temp equals URL encode of data. And then we're just going to send that back. We've got some more work to do here later if we have time. It looks like now we're doing pretty good on time. So what this should do now is it should encode whatever data I pass in and then print off my URL, because I'm replacing those tags I put in the URL with the prepped version of wherever we're getting that from. So let me go ahead and come back to my worksheet. Oh, I think it's wired to fire that right now. So let me clear off this. Let me put in a formula. I'm gonna come here and just say this equals this plus 5. Yeah. So because I've got the event handler set up on the worksheet, when I change that cell, it's triggering my code. All it's doing right now is formatting the URL, but we're going to see that it looks pretty good. I mean, here's the question mark. So that gets me to the resource on the server. I'm going to bring down the rest of this. And I'm just going to kind of break this at the ampersands so we can see the elements of it. So what we said is my first entry is going to be gov, and then, oh, Alan. So this actually pulls the user's name, and a space is not allowed in the URL. And so I'm going to encode that space with its hex version of that number. So gov space Alan. This one looks like there was nothing that had to be encoded, nothing to be encoded, nothing to be encoded. The formula had to encode the equal sign and the plus sign, and the value didn't need to be encoded. So let me go ahead and modify that so I can get the URL created again. And that URL, if I just plop that URL into a browser, it should now record that information. So it looks like it didn't have an error, says it recorded it. And yeah, there's that log. So in this case, my code is just generated in the URL. I pasted that URL into a procedure or into a browser, and it brought the data in. I've just got to get now Excel to send that URL request. How should we do it? There are several ways to do it. How have we learned to send a request to a web server already in this class? Like what tools have we used to send a request to a web server? Yeah, the web query. And since this is just a URL, I should be able to send that information using a web query. So I'm going to come back to my code, and I'm just going to peek over here at mod web query. Like there is a main thing called create web query. And so let me just kind of look at this. So create web query will actually make a web query, and it will run it, and it will put the data somewhere. So I'm going to use that right after I print that URL. I'm just going to say, oops, create web query. And create web query is only here because I imported it, right? This is not a native part of VBA. Like that web query.bas file I imported has the definition of this function. So the destination is a range. So I've got to give it a cell to go to. So let me come and let me do this. Let me make a sheet here called web query. Web query. And I'll just put it in cell A1 of web query. So just create a sheet called web query. This is expecting a range. Of all my sheets, the one called web query. And then I'm going to put it in the first cell, cells 1 of that sheet. So that's the range. I'm going to put the result. Next one is the URL. I've got a variable called URL. Has it. Next one is entire page. So I'll choose XL entire page. Save query as Boolean. So the next one is, do I want to save this query? No, not really. So don't save the query. I don't really want this web query to exist in the workbook after I've done it. I want to hit and run. I want to make that request, run the web query, and then delete the web query when we're done. And then plain text is true. The default is true, I can see there, but I'm going to go ahead and choose true here as well. The truth is, I think these last ones here are the default, so I don't even need to put those on, but those are the arguments here. Boy, I think that's going to do it. I think that's going to push that data into the Google Sheet whenever I change a cell. Well, I'm kind of excited about this. Let me bring up my worksheet. Come back to, the thing that I'm just realizing is that when I run that web query, it's going to change the value of cells on that web query sheet. And what is that going to do? Yeah, it's going to try to log it. Like change, like that cell changing. If I change that cell by VBA, it's still going to try to log it. So we better first, before we run this, because that would that really do that? It would trigger it, it would change it. That would probably put us into an endless loop that pumps a crazy amount of data into that worksheet. I haven't actually made that happen, but I'm worried that it might happen. So let's come back to this workbook, and let's only invoke this if the sheet's name is not web query. In other words, if you're changing the web query, don't don't actually try to record the edit. So let's just put an if statement here that says, if S8 is my sheet object, sh.name equals web query, this will be case sensitive, then exit sub. So hey, if we're on the web query sheet, stop, get us out of here. Okay. Better save. I'm going to save. I'm going to also bring up my web query because I'd love to see that data like go in as it goes in. I come back to my worksheet now and put in another cell. Syntax error. Oh, no parentheses around this. The parentheses are if I'm doing something with a return value, I'm not. So parentheses off. Change another one. No error. I did kind of want to see that come in over here. Let's look at my web query and see what it put on my web query sheet. Doesn't seem like it put anything. It should have put like the results of the web query there. So what have I got wrong here? I'll put a breakpoint here and see if I can just kind of track this down. Make another change. It's not triggering. Okay, so my code's never being triggered. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take off of I'm going to put a breakpoint over here and snoop around here. So let's put a breakpoint here and make sure this is still getting fired. That's not firing either. Oh, I'm in break mode. It may all be because I'm in break mode. Okay, so I'm hitting that. F8. Record the edit, F8. I'm just going to go ahead and run it from here. And okay, so that wrote in. And now it's triggered this again, but I think my SH is web query. So now when I execute that, it's going to let me out, not save, then delete, F5. Okay. We'll go ahead and take my breakpoints off now. So the reason that it wasn't working the first time is I was in break mode, and of course code doesn't execute while you're in break mode. We'll take off these breakpoints. Now I should be in good shape to actually see this stuff happen. This equals the sum. Let's just put a number in here. We can see those values coming right into that Google Sheet. Alt equals. And importantly, what we'll see is that even though we encoded that data to upload it, it doesn't come in encoded. Like the whole idea of encoding it is so that when the web server receives it, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get to the value that you're really after. And so even though we have to encode it in the URL, the web server does the decoding. We don't have to decode it ourselves. The web server does the decoding for us. Okay, so at this point, now we're successfully logging changes that the user makes to the workbook to that Google Doc. And because Google Sheets is like so fast at ingesting data that, man, it happens quick. Questions? Show me where you are with this example so far, 0 to 5. 5, 4s, and 5s. Okay, some 3s. Yeah, there's some new things here for sure. If you were already pretty comfortable with HTML and hypertext transfer protocol, then this would be a lot easier. Okay, now what we have to do now in the next 20 minutes is be able to get that data back into Excel. So I'd like to have a way, and this may be, like for this example, this is probably where it ends. I don't really need to pull this data back into Excel. Like if I'm trying to log what people are doing in a particular workbook, I'm glad to look at it in Google Sheets. But I would like to see how to bring this data back in. So let me just make another sub procedure here called get log. And for get log, I just like to be able to bring the data. I just like to bring the data down from that web page. Fortunately, when I come look at this Google Sheet, there's a way to export this data. And I'll do it by coming to the File menu. And you got to remember where it is. What is it? Download, thank you. Download. I'm not sure I don't want to download, I want to publish it. Maybe it's share. Here it is. I'm just going to share, publish to the web. So I'm just going to publish this data to the web. So click on publish to web. Entire document, nope, just form response 1. And we'll want it as a web page. And I will publish. Are you sure you want to publish it? Yes, I am. All right, I'm going to copy that URL. And I'm going to come back over here to my incognito browser and just paste that in. And so that essentially just publishes that data to a web URL. Now, we know how to bring data in from a web URL. We do that with a web query. It's a little bit problematic because I have just made this data public to anyone who has this URL. That's a little bit troublesome. We're going to find a solution to that. But first, let's get this data coming in clear text. And so I've got the URL on my clipboard. And now I'm just going to put it here. In fact, I'm just going to create a web query down here. And the URL, instead of putting it in web query cells 1, I'll put it in web query cells 10. That should put it in column J, J1. And instead of URL, I'll declare a URL variable, dim URL as a string. Actually, let's do this. We don't do constants very often. This is a good time for a constant. Const URL equals that URL. So that's the URL for the published site. We'll bring in the entire page. And again, these last 3, I think, are the defaults. So I'm just going to get rid of them just to simplify this line. So I'm telling it where I want to put the results of the web query, and I'm telling it the URL to produce the web query. So I'm going to go ahead and run get log now. And because it's going onto the web query sheet, it's not going to try to log the changes. So I'll run this with F5. There's a little delay there. But now if I come and look at web query, yeah, so my old web query is still here. The results from my last web query is still here. But here in, oh, it's hidden that first one. This web query like hides that first row. Let's see what's there. Let me unhide. Yeah, so it's basically saying we think you probably don't. Oh, wow, I'm kind of surprised that it's got like a row number. Weblog form response 1. So my guess is that stuff's actually here in HTML2. It's just hidden, which is why the web query is hiding it. So that's why it came in with this hidden, which I think is just fine. So we've got then our like all that data. If we submit a new response, come over here and make another change here. I'll change this to +2. That immediately goes to the web that immediately goes to the sheet. So that one that I added a +2 on is here, but it's not going to be here just yet. So there's usually about like a 5-minute lag. So somewhere between when that data actually hits the sheet, within 5 minutes, it'll show up here. So that's like a limitation here. We could get it here faster if we unpublish it and republish it. It'll put it out there again. But let's go ahead and deal with this like clear text issue. And that's what mod encrypt does for us. So let me come back to VBA. We brought in this thing called mod encrypt. And this is I found some encryption algorithms that were written for Visual Basic, and I converted them to Visual Basic for applications. Some very simple modifications. I don't know enough about cryptography to know if this encryption is any good or not, but that's the two functions that we're after here is one called encrypt. I give it the string I want to encrypt and the key to encrypt it with. And then there's also a decrypt, which I pass it the string that was encrypted and the same key, it will decrypt it. So let me just kind of do that right here. I should be able to say encrypt. And then a key. And the key is just some random, it could be a key that you memorize, but it's probably just some random set of numbers, or numbers and letters. And that gives us an encrypted version of that. So I should be able to use that to decrypt this string. Anyone see the problem that I'm going to have here? There's a quote. It actually put a quote in the encrypted thing. So I'm going to have to double that up so that it gets interpreted as a single quote, or as a single double quote from Excel. And that will take that and put it back here. Without knowing this key, you've got no hope of turning that back into readable text. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to encrypt everything that we send up to the web page. So that will be the next thing that we do in our prep. Where is it? Prep URL. Now, should we encrypt before or after we encode? We need to encrypt it before we encode it, because the encoding is taking any characters that are there and making them safe for a URL. And we can see that we're going to have some characters in here. We're likely to have characters that are not going to be URL safe. And so let's start off by saying temp equals encrypt data. And then we're going to encode temp. So we'll encrypt it, then we'll encode it. And so the web server will do the unencoding. The web server is going to unencode it back to the encrypted value, and that's what it's going to write into the worksheet. It's going to write that encrypted string onto the worksheet. So now it should be putting data up there in an encrypted way. There's my sheet. Here is my form. I'll put a new formula in here. Oh, I need the key. So let's do this. I'm going to make this key. So let me stop this. I'm going to take this key. It doesn't really matter. It could be the key could just be anything. And I'm going to make it a global constant. So I'm going to put it up here. Const key equals that data. Got. And then when I encrypt it, I'm going to supply the key. Okay, so just scroll back up to the top here. So I made a constant at the very top, is a global constant. That's my encryption key. I'll use it for both encrypting and decrypting. And now I'm using that to encrypt whatever goes up. Okay, let's try again to get some encrypted data to show up there. And so now it's brought that in encrypted. That's what that data looks like encrypted. So now when we pull it back down, it will come down encrypted. And so it would just be a matter of looking over our data. So once that data comes down, it'll be encrypted. Let me just go ahead and kind of bring this last one in here so we can look at it. Let's see, is it showing up here yet? Oh, good. We've got an encrypted one here. So I'm going to go ahead and run the import again. So here's get log. I'll run that. And that should give me that encrypted data right here. So now it's just going to be a matter of running the decrypt algorithm against all the data that came back in. We probably have time to do it. Should we do it? Okay, let's do it. So this is going to start, it's going to be a loop that starts in L. In fact, probably what we should do, and so everything from here on is going to be encrypted. So let's go ahead and make that true by coming back to my form. Let me just do it this way. I'm going to take these values and I'm just going to put them everywhere. I'm just going to write over my existing data with that encrypted data. Google Sheets is a little bit particular about, like, if I delete those rows, I'm kind of losing the connection between my form. Anyway, I'm just going to put those all in as encrypted. So everything that's coming is encrypted. And that'll take a minute for it to publish, but let's go ahead and get that procedure going. So we're going to have something like that right here. In fact, maybe I'll just go ahead and do the same thing on this end. Okay, so I've got now that data as it will come in with everything encrypted. So what I want to do is I probably just want to look at, like, K1. What happens if I hit Control Star here? No, let's go to K5 and get the current region. That should get the data that I'm after. And we just want to process through every cell there, but we don't want to deal with these dates because these don't get encrypted because we're not sending those up. Those are getting generated by the server. Okay, so let's see if we can get a reference to this proper range. So after we've brought that data in, let's dim RNG as a range. Set RNG equal to sheets web query dot cells dot range. What did I say? K5. Yeah, let's do K5 dot current region. And I think we may just need to offset that a little bit. So let's stop here and see what we get. Okay, so I'm curious to know what my range is at this point. It's J5 to Q18. So I think I want to offset that 2 columns to the right. So offset is row and column, so 0 rows, 2 columns. I'll run that again and see what I've got. Now it's L5 to S18. So now it's starting right there and going, oh, I've got some blank rows over here, some blank cells over here. I think that's okay. But I think if I try to unencrypt something that's blank, it'll still be blank. Let me find that out. Let us decrypt. The 0 length string with just any old key. Yeah, it's still a 0 length string. So now I think all I need to do is process every cell in that range. So let me dim cell as a range for each cell in range. Cell.value equals decrypt cell.value. So we're changing the value to be its unencrypted version of itself. So we're going to pass the value into decrypt, pass the key into decrypt, and it should decrypt that data after it brings it in. Let's give it a shot. I don't think that did anything. What do we got wrong here? Oh, I wonder. Let's go through step by step here. So let me pause here. We stop before they do the decoding so I can see what we've got here. Okay, so that's all there. I don't really want that copied. And let's step through. Looks like it's doing okay. I'm not sure what I did wrong before. I'm not quite sure I even ran it before. Why that formula is, oh, it's probably just a formatting. Yeah, that's just formatted as a date. That's interesting. So if I were to delete this data, run this again. Oh, I was probably on stop. So when I hit play, it just finished off running. That's probably what it was. Run it again. It should bring the data in and decrypt it. Okay. Whew, we made it with a minute to spare. Questions? Tell me, just kind of on a scale of 1 to 5, now that you've seen this, likelihood of you doing something like this in the future, 0 to 5. 0, probably never do this. 5, I'm going to go home and do it tonight. So some twos are saying, who knows, maybe, but you've got it. All right. Thank you very much. I will see you on Monday. Class dismissed.